Dear friends, welcome to another episode of The Spoke Master. In this video, we will talk about the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip and why, despite this, full peace remains such a distant dream in the region. If you're not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any updates. This Wednesday, January 15th, the long-awaited ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas was announced. The first phase of this ceasefire was announced after 15 months of a devastating war that began following Hamas's attacks on southern Israel on October 7, 2023. The agreement was mediated by Qatar, which played a central role in the negotiations alongside the United States, with this cooperation being even more notable for the collaboration between current President Joe Biden and President-elect Donald Trump, who joined forces to pressure both parties into signing the agreement before Trump's inauguration. The agreement establishes a 42-day ceasefire period during which the release of 33 Israeli hostages held in Gaza is foreseen, in exchange for the release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners detained in Israel, some of them sentenced to life imprisonment for attacks with fatalities. Additionally, humanitarian aid will be significantly expanded, with about 600 trucks daily bringing basic supplies to the population of Gaza. This agreement is obviously a huge relief and represents a milestone, but also raises questions about its viability and impact. First, it's crucial to highlight the cooperation between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, essential for the ceasefire's realization. Despite their great political rivalries and historical ideological differences, both leaders showed an unusual willingness to put geopolitical interests above partisan disputes. This union, though pragmatic, underscores the critical dimension of diplomacy in moments of global crisis. Biden, throughout his term, worked to establish foundations for a ceasefire, initiating efforts in May 2024 when he proposed a framework for a truce that included a phased hostage release plan and intensive humanitarian assistance. His approach focused on dialogue and coordinated diplomatic pressure, supported by his team led by Brett McGurk, known for his extensive Middle East experience. This contrasted with Trump's more direct and imposing approach, who used his platform and influence to pressure the involved parties. In a characteristic move, he threatened severe consequences if the agreement wasn't signed before his inauguration. With this aggressive rhetoric, combined with his historical closeness to Benjamin Netanyahu's government, bringing urgency to the entire process. At the same time, Trump authorized a special envoy, Steve Witkoff, to work in coordination with Biden's team, creating a rare moment of bipartisan cooperation in U.S. foreign policy. With this dynamic, though very tense, proving crucial for the success of the negotiations. The ceasefire details reflect the complex nature of the conflict, with the first phase prioritizing the release of women, children, and elderly hostages. These vulnerable groups were chosen as a sign of good faith, but the process of identification and transfer is logistically challenging. On the other hand, the release of Palestinian prisoners convicted of particularly heinous crimes with fatal victims is a very sensitive issue in Israel. Humanitarian aid is another central pillar of this agreement. Gaza, devastated by war, faces an unprecedented humanitarian crisis, with the dispatch of 600 daily supply trucks marking an important effort to combat this crisis, but not without challenges. The logistics of truck entry, border crossing controls, and the risk of resource diversion are constant concerns, as it's important to remember that a significant portion of all humanitarian aid entering Gaza is captured and used by Hamas, with civilians receiving only crumbs. Moreover, the need to rebuild basic infrastructure like hospitals, schools, and water systems further increases the operation's complexity. Another important aspect is the withdrawal of Israeli troops from densely populated areas, a measure aimed at reducing immediate tension and creating a more conducive environment for future negotiations. However, there is internal resistance in Israel, especially from more conservative sectors who see this decision as a sign of weakness. Meanwhile, Hamas, after losing over 17,000 operatives, most of its leaders and commanders, and nearly all its infrastructure, faces its own crisis of legitimacy with internal criticisms about the conflict's management and its devastating consequences for the civilian population. Despite the ceasefire, peace in the Middle East remains a very distant goal for several reasons. Territorial identity and sovereignty disputes have created a deep divide between Israelis and Palestinians. Hamas's fragmented leadership also complicates this process. In Gaza, Hamas faces isolation after losing regional allies, notably Syria, while Israel deals with internal pressures from factions criticizing the agreement. Both sides see each other as existential threats, with this perception hindering long-term negotiations and creating a cycle of recurrent violence. The involvement of external powers often reinforces divisions rather than promoting lasting solutions. The very involvement of Biden and Trump shows how external political interests can influence the conflict's direction.